Alright, getting on to part 6 of this, I suppose. I think that's where we're at. Got it laid flat, so the main shaft is about to go in. Did check my in play on the counter shaft with the dial indicator. Had about 11 or 12 thousandths of in play on it. Parts kit did not come with shims, so I took some cuttings of a pop can. Alright, I'm just going to pop in and say, I know using pop can cuttings probably not the greatest idea. I was very tired, monster can was there, I needed shims, I didn't have shims, so we made do with what we had. We'll see how it works out. Everything's locked in and put together, so it's either going to work or it's not, and if it doesn't work, I'll make sure to record it all and get more content to show all you guys. So yeah, moving on. Put them on there all around the shim and got it down to about 4 to 5 thousandths. Which everything I'm seeing, that is pretty well within spec. So we're going to go ahead and go on to putting the main shaft in. Alright, main shaft is set down in there. So just kind of shoehorn it in. Tail end goes first. Watch your fingers on this edge and try to support this. I was able to grab on this front synchro hub and kind of lowered it in there. And just kind of drops down in. So we're getting there. Then you take your big race that you'll have out of your kit, and it sits just in there, just like the counter shaft. It'll go in there with just a little bit of persuasion. Kind of slides in pretty nicely. Alright, next on the back is we have, mine had 2 shims here on this back bearing. So 2 shims. Then our rear retainer, this hole in the middle, lines up with this hole in the middle. It is an oil passage. And then these 4 bolts, all the retainers use bolts with a loose washer on them. Focus, there we go. So all 4 of the counter shaft retainer bolts have that loose washer on here. And then the retainer up front for the input shaft uses these flange head ones. About 28 foot-pounds of torque on those. So we're going to get that retainer put on, and then after that, this seal will go in the front here. So we'll go ahead and get that done. Alright, and then this synchro ring is going to come down into the hub. We'll get it lined up with the notches. Set it there in front. And it'll sit just like that, more or less. Alright, then next you'll take your cone, which is this guy with this kind of square spline looking thing going on, and you will have to push down on the tail end of the main shaft and kind of fiddle with it to get it to finally slide in there, and then line everything up and it'll get in there. Once you have that in there to where it's going to line up, you'll take your little flat thrust bearing, lube it up, it'll set down there onto that snout. Lube up your input shaft needle bearing. It'll also sit on that snout. And you're ready for your input shaft to get put together. Alright, so you get your bearing onto your input shaft with your, if you have a hydraulic press and a proper size tube, great. If not, trust the exhaust pipe about the right size works with a bit more persuasion. But anyway, so this guy will go up in here, and you'll just kind of have to wiggle everything, spin, wiggle everything together. You have to put the phone down for a second. Push down on the tail of the main shaft. Everything will get wiggled in all together. And there you go. Next to set up is the input retainer. So you get your race into your retainer. I'm just using the Icon race and seal driver, as I have been. And then next is this little seal. It'll go down into there, just like that. I don't have the proper driver, so I'm going to have to figure something out. I'll take another clip once that's in and show you all what I used. Alright, so I just very carefully used this punch to get it most of the way down, then a smaller punch. Just going around, being very careful and patient with it until it was fully seated. And get you some RTV on there. All around, nice and thin. Make it as pretty or as ugly as you want. It's not a super fragile transmission. And then slide it on. Make sure to line up your oil hole with that little groove there in the case and get her slid on there. Probably gonna need bolts to hold it in as the bearings taper trying to push it out. And there's that. Starting to look more and more like a transmission as you go. Alright, your 28 foot-pounds on all four of those bolts with a little bit of Loctite. And then you can see you got a good little bit of squish of RTV all around, so that shouldn't leak there. We got the seal inside of there, pre-lubed that as well, so shouldn't leak from the shaft. And that's everything for inside the case. All we have left is stuff on the rear end. Alright, then you're going to check your main shaft in play. I just reused the two old shims that I had from my teardown, and we are still in spec. Spec is 2 to 6 thou. Got about 4.5 to 5, so should be good there. To set it up on the table, make sure push that snout all the way up against the edge of your table. That way it doesn't fall off on you. And there we go, we're good for all the stuff on the back end now. Alright, so here on the counter shaft there's this hole, and then this little pin goes in there. See if I can do this with one hand. May need to grab some pliers. Oh, almost, yep, I'm gonna need some pliers. But yeah, that pin will go into that hole, and then our little bevel washer here, will slide on, interfacing with that pin. So give me a second to get some pliers and get that in there. Alright, there's the pin in there, and this guy will go and slide onto there, and don't worry about that hole, and there's another one here on the bottom as well. Right there. Nothing goes into those holes. Alright, then you'll lube up your bearings, and mine does have a spacer between the two bearings. And then 5th gear has to go on with the shift fork at the same time. You have to kind of wiggle it onto that shaft as well. So I'm going to need both hands for this, so I'm not going to be able to record that right now. But with everything else, I will show the end result. There's 5th gear on there with its shift fork. Got the holes lined up for the roll pins there. I'm going to go ahead and get that done too. Alright, so roll pins are in there. And then you have your new synchro that comes in that kit. And the cone, and 5th gear's on there. So, yeah, if everything was spinning, that shift fork would go back and forth to lock this guy in. So that's 5th gear on the counter shaft side. Alright, then 5th gear on the main shaft. It's going to slide on like that. You know, get the teeth lined up, get all the way seated. Have seen a lot of people saying that they have issues with 5th gear, you know, coming off and destroying everything in the back, mainly this nut coming loose. So for the nut side, because we still have that big balancer to put on, I'm going to put a whole bunch of red Loctite on these threads. And then some people have put some sort of locking compound on the spline, so I might also put red Loctite there, or look around my garage to see if I have anything useful. But I know when I took this apart, there was nothing in these splines, and there's only a normal amount of Loctite on these threads, so I'm not too worried about with this transmission. A lot of the people that have issues with that 5th gear coming off, I think, are the big Dodge diesel trucks, and this is not that, so I think I'll be fine just doing what I can here. Alright, we got 5th gear on there along with this balancer. I forgot how much of a pain it was to get this balancer off of there, and it is just as much of a pain to get on there. My arm is on fire from swinging the hammer to hit this pipe to drive it on there, and we mushed the hell out of that pipe fighting that thing back on there. So I don't think the GM NV4500 had the issue of 5th gear backing off, because this thing's on there pretty damn well. I also have to drive on the actual 5th gear, which I don't remember if I had to do that or not. I don't remember, it's been too damn long. But either way, I don't think that's going to come off. I'm still going to put red Loctite on the nuts. This washer is not perfectly flat. It is domed, and you put the if you had a whole dome, you put it to where it was like this, with the wide side going that way. That outer rim makes contact with the balancer first. Alright, then you take your super awesome fancy dancy DIY made socket, get your thread started by hand on there and just hammer this until your impact can no longer go, as everyone else recommends with that 5th gear nut. And it's on there damn good, so should have no issue with this ever coming off, given this has to be pounded on with enough force that made me contemplate buying a press. This got pressed on as well, which now I do remember I had to pull it off also. So we got friction splines there, friction splines here, and then a concaved washer putting pressure on all that with a nut that's torqued and Loctited on there with the force of at least 3 different gods. Should be good to go, but that's where we're going to call it for tonight. The actual transmission itself is now all back together. Now I just got to put cases back on and still figure out if I'm going to go through the top end shift fork linkage thing. Oh, one last thing to help lock in this output shaft so you can really torque down on this. If you want to put a torque wrench on it, you can slide this guy forward and this guy backwards, so now you have it locked into 2 gears. It can no longer spin. So there's that as well, and that's about it for tonight.